The great hall of Concordia Prime stretched upward into darkness. Thousands of alien faces looked down from their seats, their eyes cold and judging. Captain Daeho Kim stood at the center of the chamber, feeling very small. He had traveled across the stars to reach this place. He had practiced his words 100 times. But now, standing before the Galactic Council, his mouth felt dry. Beside him stood Ambassador Hana Lee, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She had spent 10 years building relationships with alien diplomats. She had learned their customs, their languages, their ways of thinking. On her other side stood Chief Scientist Tai Min Park, carrying datapads filled with evidence of human achievement. Together, they represented the best of humanity. Together, they had come to ask for one thing. Acceptance. Elder Counselor Voth rose from his seat at the highest point of the chamber. He was a Kelrith, tall and thin, with skin like gray stone. His voice echoed through the hall like thunder in a valley. "We have heard your petition," Voth said. "We have studied your species for 10 of your years. We have watched you closely." Daeho felt hope rise in his chest. They had worked so hard for this moment. "And we have decided," Voth continued, "that humanity is not ready." The words hit Daeho like a physical blow. Not ready. After everything they had done. After all the compromises and negotiations and patience. Not ready. But Voth was not finished. His next words were worse. Humanity is too aggressive, too violent, too hungry for expansion. You breed conflict wherever you go. You cannot control your own emotions. You fight among yourselves even as you reach for the stars. Voth's eyes were hard and cold. The Council has decided that humanity must be contained. Hana stepped forward, her voice steady despite the anger in her eyes. "Counselor, if we could discuss this further." "There is nothing to discuss." Voth raised one hand, and the chamber fell silent. "All human vessels will withdraw beyond the outer marker. This boundary will separate your solar system from Council space. Any human ship that crosses this line will be destroyed without warning." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Daeho could not believe what he was hearing. This was not rejection. This was exile. They were being locked in a cage. "You cannot do this," Tai Min said, stepping forward. "We have done nothing wrong. We have followed every rule, every protocol. Your very nature is wrong," Voth replied. "You are a threat to galactic peace. The decision is final." Guards moved toward the human delegation. Daeho looked around the chamber, searching for a friendly face, a voice of support. He found none. Some aliens looked away. Others watched with cold satisfaction. Not one spoke in humanity's defense. The journey home aboard the diplomatic Vessel Horizon's Promise was the longest of Daeho's life. The 3 representatives sat in silence, unable to find words for what had happened. 10 years of work. 10 years of hope. All of it destroyed in a single moment. Hana finally spoke. "I truly believed they would accept us." "They were never going to accept us," Tai Min replied, his voice bitter. "They were always afraid of us. We just couldn't see it." When they reached Earth, the news had already spread. Every screen on the planet showed the same footage. Elder Counselor Voth pronouncing humanity's exile. The reaction was immediate and fierce. In Seoul, millions gathered in the streets, their voices raised in anger and grief. In New York, people burned effigies of Voth. In Lagos and Mumbai, protests lasted for days. President Min-Soo Choi watched the chaos from his office in the United Earth Assembly building. He was an old man, white-haired, and weathered by decades of politics. He had dreamed of being the president who welcomed humanity into the galactic community. Instead, he would be remembered as the president who was told his species was not good enough. His advisors wanted him to make a statement calling for calm. They wanted him to promise that humanity would prove itself, that someday the council would change its mind. But Min Su was tired of begging. He was tired of trying to please aliens who looked at humanity like insects. When he finally addressed the United Earth Assembly, his speech surprised everyone. For 10 years, we have bent ourselves into shapes we did not recognize, Min Su said. We have apologized for our nature. We have hidden our strength. We have pretended to be less than we are, all to gain the approval of those who will never respect us. He paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of every nation on Earth. No more. The chamber was silent. If the galaxy will not accept us, then we will build our own future. We will not wait for permission. We will not beg for acceptance. We will forge our own path among the stars. Min Su's voice grew stronger. I propose the Imperium Initiative, a plan that will span centuries, a plan that will transform humanity from exiles into emperors. The vote was unanimous. Every nation, every faction, every political party agreed. Humanity would no longer look to the stars with hope. They would look with determination. On Mars, in the shadow of Olympus Mons, engineer Sujin Quan gathered her team. She was young, brilliant, and furious. She had spent her career dreaming of collaboration with alien scientists. Now those dreams were dead. We have samples of Council technology, she told her team. Things they shared during the diplomatic period. Things they never expected us to understand. She placed a strange device on the table before them. It hummed with power humanity could not yet explain. We are going to take it apart. We are going to learn how it works. And then we are going to build something better. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Jinwoo Nam stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the shipyards that circled the planet. For years, those shipyards had built exploration vessels, diplomatic transports, peaceful ships for a peaceful future. That future was gone now. Change the production orders, Jinwoo said to his officers. From this day forward, we build warships. The exile had begun. But humanity was not grieving. Humanity was planning. Humanity was building. And deep in the hearts of every man, woman, and child on Earth, a fire was burning. They had been told they were not good enough. They would prove the galaxy wrong. The outer marker hung in space like a line drawn in sand. On one side stood the vast civilization of the Galactic Council. On the other stood humanity, alone and defiant. The Council believed the exile would break humanity's spirit. They believed that isolation would teach these aggressive apes their place. They could not have been more. Wrong. In laboratories and shipyards, in colonies and training camps, the work began. Parents told their children stories of the exile, of the arrogance of the Council, of the injustice humanity had suffered. Those children grew up with fire in their eyes and steel in their hearts. They would be the generation that proved the galaxy wrong. They would be the generation that made the Council regret their decision. The stars watched silently as humanity prepared. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. 50 years passed like a slow fire burning in the dark. The generation that witnessed the exile grew old and died, but their anger did not die with them. They passed it to their children like a sacred inheritance. Those children grew up hearing stories of the Council's arrogance, of Voth's cold words, of the day humanity was told they were not good enough. By the time those children became adults, the anger had transformed into something harder, something patient, something dangerous. Colonel Lee Jun-han stood on the observation deck of Guardian's Watch, a massive defense station floating near the outer marker. He was 32 years old. He had never seen an alien in person. He had never spoken to anyone from the Council worlds. But he had trained his entire life for the moment when they might come. Through the thick glass, He could see the invisible line that separated humanity from the rest of the galaxy. Beyond it lay countless stars, countless worlds, countless species that had decided humanity. The Yun felt nothing but cold determination when he looked at that boundary. His father had been a diplomat, one of the junior staff who stood behind Captain Deo on that terrible day. His father had spent the rest of his life in shame, believing he had failed humanity. The Yun had watched his father grow old and bitter. He had promised himself that he would never feel such shame. He would never bow to aliens who looked at humanity like animals. "Any activity on the sensors?" He asked his communications officer. "Nothing, Colonel." "As usual. They've forgotten we exist." The Jun nodded. "Good. Let them forget. Let them grow comfortable and lazy. When the time came, their surprise would be complete. Far from the outer marker, on Earth itself, Director Yoon Pyong-song walked through the corridors of the Department of Advanced Technologies. She was 60 years old, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, and she had spent her entire career pushing the boundaries of human science. The laboratories she passed were filled with wonders. Faster-than-light drives that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of years. Energy shields that could stop any weapon the Council possessed. Plasma weapons that burned hotter than the surface of the sun. All of it developed without any help from the aliens who had rejected humanity. A young scientist ran up to her, excitement on his face. "Director Song, the new prototype is ready for testing." Yoon Kyung followed him to a testing chamber where a small device sat on a metal table. It looked simple, almost ordinary, but when they activated it, the device spent the light around itself and vanished completely. Perfect stealth technology. Ships equipped with this device could move through Council space without being detected. "Excellent work," Yoon Kyung said. "Begin mass production immediately." The Council had said humanity was too primitive to understand advanced technology. They had shared only the most basic devices during the diplomatic period, treating humans like children who could not be trusted with real knowledge. They had underestimated humanity's ability to learn, to adapt, to surpass their teachers. Beyond the outer marker, in secret, humanity had been breaking the rules for decades. Hyanwu Park stood on the surface of Kepler 442b and watched lightning crack across the purple sky. The wind howled around him, carrying dust and ice that stung his exposed skin. This world was brutal, hostile, nothing like the comfortable Earth he had left behind. But it was free. The colony of New Horizon had existed for 20 years now. 3,000 humans lived in underground bunkers, growing food in hydroponic farms, mining the planet's rich mineral deposits. They answered to no council. They followed no alien rules. They were the first true citizens of the future Imperium. "Storm's getting worse," said his deputy, a woman named Yuna Lim. "We might have to delay the supply run." "Delay it then," Hyanwu replied. "We've survived worse." Life on Kepler 442b had taught the colonists lessons that comfortable Earth citizens would never learn. They knew how to survive with nothing. They knew how to work together under impossible conditions. They knew that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its numbers. It was its refusal to give up. In another part of the galaxy, Scout pilot G1 Yoon drifted through a dead star system in her small, stealth-equipped ship. She had been exploring for 3 months now, mapping systems that the Council had marked as worthless and forgotten. Most of them were empty, just rocks and ice and darkness. But this system was different. G1 stared at her sensor readings, unable to believe what she was seeing. On the 4th planet, hidden beneath layers of dust and stone, were structures. Ancient structures. Structures older than the Council itself, older than any civilization the galaxy currently knew. She landed her ship carefully and walked through the ruins. The architecture was strange, beautiful, nothing like anything she had ever seen. Advanced technology lay scattered everywhere, devices that hummed with power even after millions of years. She picked up a small crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Whatever civilization had built this place, they had been far more advanced than the Council. And they had left their secrets behind. Waiting for someone to find them. G1 transmitted her findings back to Earth through a secure channel. She knew that this discovery would change everything. While humanity grew stronger in secret, the Galactic Council grew weaker without knowing it. Counselor Myra of the Talvine Collective sat in her office, reading old reports about humanity. She was one of the few council members who had argued against the exile 50 years ago. She had been overruled, dismissed, told that she was being sentimental about a primitive species. Now she was worried. Human radio signals had gone silent decades ago. No ships approached the outer marker. No messages, no probes, no signs of activity at all. For a species that had once been so eager to join the stars, this silence was wrong. She brought her concerns to the Council, but they laughed at her. "The humans have learned their place," said Elder Counselor Voth. "Still alive and still arrogant after all these years. They are probably fighting among themselves as usual. They will destroy themselves eventually. It is their nature." Myra did not believe it. Something was happening beyond the outer marker, something the Council could not see. She tried to send scouts to investigate, but her requests were denied. The Council had more important matters to attend to: trade disputes, territorial negotiations, the usual business of a comfortable empire. They had no idea that the universe was about to change. On Earth, a new generation reached adulthood. These young men and women had never known anything but the exile. They had never dreamed of joining the Council. They had only dreamed of surpassing it. Fleet Admiral Dong Hyun Chai, just 25 years old, received his first command, a new battleship called Eternal Defiance. The ship was massive, bristling with weapons, faster than anything the Council possessed. Standing on its bridge, Dong Hyun felt the weight of history on his shoulders. His grandmother had been alive during the exile. She had told him stories of that day, of the shame and anger, of President Min Su's speech that changed everything. She had made him promise, before she died, that he would live to see the day humanity took its rightful place among the stars. "Grandmother," he whispered, looking out at the stars, "I will keep my promise." The outer marker still stood, that invisible line between humanity and the galaxy. But it would not stand forever. The Council had created that boundary to contain humanity. They did not understand that they had only given humanity time. Time to prepare. Time to build. Time to become something the galaxy had never seen before. The long silence was almost over. And when humanity finally spoke again, the galaxy would listen. 100 years after the exile, humanity was ready. The ceremony took place on Mars, at the foot of the monument to the exile. The monument was a simple thing, a black stone pillar carved with the words Elder Counselor Voth had spoken on that terrible day. For a century, those words had reminded humanity of their shame. Today, they would remind humanity of their triumph. Prime Executor Baora Shin stood before the pillar, dressed in the black and silver uniform of the Terran Imperium. She was 50 years old, strong and sharp, chosen by the people to lead humanity into its new future. Behind her stood the commanders of every fleet, the governors of every colony, the leaders of every nation. Billions watched from every human world. 100 years ago, Biora said, her voice carried across the stars by countless transmitters. "The Galactic Council told us we were not worthy. They said we were too aggressive, too violent, too primitive. They locked us behind the outer marker like animals in a cage." She paused, looking up at the stars. They were wrong. The crowd before her began to cheer. Biora raised her hand for silence. Today, I declare the birth of the Terran Imperium. We are no longer exiles. We are no longer prisoners. We are an empire. We control 73 star systems. We command 8,000 warships. 50 billion humans live across 30 worlds. And we answer to no one but ourselves. The cheering grew louder, spreading from Mars to Earth to every colony in human space. Ships fired their weapons into the void in celebration. Children too young to understand the history still felt the joy in the air. This was the moment their grandparents had dreamed of. This was the moment that changed everything that far away in Council space. The announcement was received with disbelief. Elder Counselor Voth, ancient and withered, but still alive, watched the transmission from his private chambers. His gray face showed no emotion, but his hands trembled. 73 star systems. 8,000 warships. How was this possible? The humans had been contained. The humans had been controlled. The humans were supposed to be nothing. He called an emergency session of the council. The great chamber was filled with confusion and fear. Species that had not thought about humanity in decades suddenly realized their mistake. "This is impossible," said a delegate from the Vorn hierarchy. "Our sensors show nothing beyond the outer marker." "They developed stealth technology," Counselor Myra said quietly. She had waited a long time for this moment. She had warned them, and they had not listened. They have been expanding in secret for decades. They have technology we do not understand. And now they are stronger than we ever imagined. Voth slammed his hand against his podium. "Then we will destroy them. We will mobilize our fleets and crush this rebellion before it spreads." But Myra shook her head. "You do not understand. This is not a rebellion. This is a new power. And if we attack them without understanding their capabilities, we may not survive." The council argued for days. Some wanted war. Some wanted negotiation. Some simply wanted to pretend nothing had changed. But the decision was taken from them. When news arrived from the outer marker, Captain Zorveth of the Kelrith Dominion had been patrolling the border when he detected human ships in what he still considered council territory. He was arrogant, like all Kelrith. He had been told all his life that humans were primitive and weak. He ordered his fleet of 50 ships to intercept and demand surrender. Admiral Sung-Ho Beek received the demand aboard his dreadnought. Indomitable will. He was a calm man, patient and thoughtful. But he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He read Zorvath's message carefully, then turned to his communications officer. "Send this reply," he said. "The council has no authority here." Zorvath could not believe what he was hearing. A human was refusing a direct order from a Kelrith captain. It was unthinkable. It was insulting. He ordered his ships to attack. The battle lasted 17 minutes. Imperium ships moved with speed and precision the council had never seen. Their weapons cut through Kelrith shields like paper. Their tactics were perfect, every ship working together like fingers on a single hand. Zorvath's fleet was destroyed completely. Not a single Kelrith vessel survived. Not a single Imperium ship took significant damage. Sung-Ho stood on his bridge and watched the last Kelrith ship explode. He felt no joy, no satisfaction. Only the cold knowledge that everything had changed. Humanity had just declared war on the Galactic Council. There was no going back now. The news of Zorvath's defeat spread across the galaxy like fire. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive suddenly realized their error. The Kelrith Dominion was one of the strongest military powers in the Council. Their ships were supposed to be unbeatable, and they had been destroyed in less than 20 minutes. Voth demanded vengeance. He called for the largest military mobilization in Council history. 300 warships from every member species would gather and strike at the heart of human space. They would show these upstart apes the true power of the galactic community. War. Marshal Kreneth was given command of the Armada. He was old and experienced, a veteran of conflicts that happened centuries before humanity had even developed fire. He accepted the command with confidence. 300 ships against a few human colonies. It would be over quickly, but as Kreneth gathered his forces, the Imperium was not waiting passively. Prime Executor Bora called her admirals to a war council on the command station Sword of Earth, hidden in the depths of human space. They studied the intelligence reports, the enemy fleet compositions, the likely attack routes. They had been planning for this war for generations. Every scenario had been considered. Every strategy had been prepared. They will attack the outer marker first, Admiral Dong Hyan Chai said, pointing to the holographic map. It is the obvious target. They want to send a message. Then we will let them come, Baora replied. And we will send a message of our own. Across human space, the call went out. Every shipyard worked around the clock. Every fleet gathered at rally points. Every citizen prepared for the conflict that would decide humanity's future. There was no fear in human hearts, only determination. They had waited 100 years for this moment. They were ready. On distant colony worlds, veterans like Hyanwu Park gathered their families and prepared for the worst. Scientists like Taemin Park, now very old but still brilliant, worked day and night to develop new weapons. Soldiers like Colonel Jun Han checked their equipment and waited for orders. And in her private quarters, Prime Executor Bu O-Ra looked at an old photograph. It showed the original delegation that had stood before the council a century ago. Captain Daeho, Ambassador Hana, Scientist Taemin. They had gone to the stars with hope in their hearts, and they had been sent home in shame. We remember you, Ba-Ra whispered to the photograph, and we will not fail you. The Imperium was awake. The Council was mobilizing, and the galaxy was about to witness a war that would change everything. In the darkness between the stars, two great powers prepared to collide. One fought to maintain its ancient dominance. The other fought for the right to exist. Only one would survive. War Marshal Kreneth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Pride of Kelrith, and watched his armada gather. 300 warships from across the galaxy, the greatest military force assembled in 1,000 years. Ships from the Kelruth Dominion, the Vorn Hierarchy, the Talveen Collective, and a dozen other species filled the void around him. Their weapons were charged. Their crews were ready. Victory was certain. Set course for the outer marker, Kreneth commanded. We will teach these humans the price of defiance. The journey took 3 weeks. Kreneth used the time to review intelligence reports about human capabilities. The reports were incomplete, filled with guesses and assumptions. The Council had not seriously studied humanity in decades. But Kreneth was not worried. Numbers would decide this battle. 300 ships against whatever scattered forces the humans could gather. Mathematics favored the Council. When the Armada arrived at the outer marker, they found the human fleet waiting for them. Fleet Admiral Dong Hyan Chai watched the enemy approach from the command center of the supercarrier Eternal Defiance. His fleet numbered only 80 ships, less than a third of the enemy force. His officers were nervous, though they hid it well. The Council Armada was massive, filling their sensors with countless hostile signatures. Admiral, his tactical officer said, they are broadcasting a surrender demand. Dong Hyan listened to the message. Kreneth's voice was cold and confident, promising mercy if the humans laid down their weapons immediately. Unconditional surrender. Complete submission. Return to the exile. They should never have been broken. No response, Dong Hyan said quietly. Let them wonder. The Council Armada advanced, their formation perfect, their confidence absolute. They expected the human fleet to flee or surrender. They did not expect what happened next. The first wave of Imperium ships vanished. Kreneth stared at his sensors in confusion. 30 human vessels had simply disappeared from his screens. Stealth technology, he realized. Technology the Council did not possess. Before he could issue new orders, alarms screamed across his bridge. The vanished ships had reappeared behind his fleet. Plasma fire erupted from angles Kreneth never anticipated. Human weapons tore through Council shields with terrifying efficiency. Ships that had survived centuries of conflicts exploded in seconds. The perfect formation dissolved into chaos. All ships, defensive positions. Kreneth shouted, but his orders came too late. The humans were everywhere, striking and vanishing, appearing where they should not be. Their tactics were unlike anything in Council military doctrine. They did not fight in lines or formations. They fought like shadows, like ghosts, like the storms of an angry god. Admiral Dong Haiyan watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. Every move, every strike, every retreat had been planned in advance. Decades of war games and simulations had prepared his commanders for this moment. They knew exactly how Council ships would respond, exactly where their weaknesses lay, exactly when to press the attack and when to withdraw. Second wave. Engage, he ordered calmly. 50 more Imperium ships joined the battle. Fresh weapons, fresh crews, hitting an enemy already reeling from the first assault. Council ships tried to regroup, but every time they formed a defensive line, human ships appeared behind them and tore it apart. 18 hours. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, Krenov's mighty armada had been reduced to less than half its original strength. The survivors fled in disorder, their confidence shattered, their belief in Council superiority destroyed. Not a single human capital ship had been lost. Dong Haiyan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but only a moment. Victory in defense was not enough. The Council would regroup, rebuild, return with even greater forces. The Imperium needed to take the war to the enemy. Signal all commands, he said. Operation Thunderbolt begins now. Across human space, hidden fleets receive the order. Using routes mapped by decades of secret exploration, Imperium strike groups bypassed Council defenses and struck at the heart of enemy territory. Commander Ji He-an led the assault on the Kelrith primary shipyard in the Thoreau system. Her strike group of 12 ships arrived without warning, emerging from stealth just as the shipyard's night shift began. The defenders had no time to react. Che, he was young, only 28 years old, but she had trained for this mission her entire life. She knew the shipyard's layout, its defensive systems, its weak points. Her ships struck with surgical precision, destroying dry docks and construction facilities while avoiding civilian areas. Commander, her sensor officer reported, enemy reinforcements are approaching. 40 ships, 10 minutes out. We're done here anyway, Jae-hee replied. All ships withdraw. The strike group vanished into stealth, leaving the burning shipyard behind. They had achieved their objective. The Kelrith would not build new warships for years. And the message was clear. Nowhere in Council space was safe. Similar attacks struck across the galaxy. Imperium forces hit supply depots, communication relays, military bases. They never stayed long enough to be caught. They never took unnecessary risks. But every strike reminded the Council that this war would not be fought only at the outer marker. The Council began to fracture dot in the great chamber of Concordia Prime. Delegates screamed at each other. The Kelrith demanded more resources for vengeance. The Vorn wanted to negotiate before more damage was done. Smaller species, caught between the great powers, simply wanted the war to end. Counselor Myra watched the chaos with tired eyes. She had predicted this. She had warned them. But no one had listened until it was too late. "We cannot win this war through force alone," she told the council. "The humans have spent a century preparing for this conflict. Their technology surpasses ours in many areas. Their soldiers are more motivated than ours. Their commanders are more innovative. You suggest we surrender?" Voth spat, his ancient face twisted with rage. "I suggest we negotiate," Myra replied calmly. "Recognize the Terran Imperium as a sovereign power. Establish borders and treaties. End this war before it destroys us all." But Voth would not hear of it. He had exiled humanity a century ago. He had called them barbaric, primitive, unworthy. To admit now that they were equals would be to admit that he had been wrong. His pride would not allow it. "We will mobilize every ship in council space," Voth declared. "We will strip our borders, empty our reserves. We will destroy the human threat once and for all." The vote was close, but Voth won. The council would continue the war. In human space, Prime Executor B.O. Ree received reports of the council's decision. She had hoped for negotiation. She did not want this war, despite everything the council had done. But if the council would not make peace, then humanity would force peace upon them. "Prepare the fleets," she ordered. "We're taking the war to Concordia Prime." The next phase of the war began. Imperium fleets pushed deeper into council territory, capturing systems and establishing forward bases. Council forces, stretched thin by Voth's desperate mobilization, could not respond effectively. For every human ship they destroyed, they lost 3 of their own. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the species they had exiled a century ago brought the ancient council to its knees. On the colony world of Kepler 442b, old Hyan-Wu Park listened to news reports of the war. He had spent his life building a home on a hostile world, proving that humanity could survive anywhere. Now his grandchildren were soldiers, fighting among the stars for humanity's future. "We're winning," his granddaughter told him during a rare video call. "The council can't stop us. We're too strong." Hyan-Wu smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. War was never truly won. There were only survivors and losses. But he kept his thoughts to himself. "Come home safe," he told her. "That's all that matters." The war raged on, and the galaxy would never be the same. The siege of Concordia Prime began on a day that would be remembered for 1,000 years. Supreme Commander Mi Young Kong stood on the bridge of the flagship Ascendant Earth and watched the great orbital station grow larger in her viewscreen. This was the heart of the Galactic Council, the place where humanity had been judged and found unworthy a century ago. This was where Elder Counselor Voth had spoken the words that changed everything. And this was where the war would end. Her fleet numbered 500 warships, the largest Imperium force ever assembled. They surrounded Concordia Prime like a fist closing around a throat. The station's defenders fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. One by one, the defensive platforms fell silent. One by one, the escape routes were sealed. Inside Concordia Prime, chaos reigned. Council delegates fled through the corridors, searching for ships that would never come. Military officers issued orders that no one followed. The great chamber, where countless species had gathered to govern the galaxy, was nearly empty. Only a few remained, watching the end of their power on tactical displays. Elder Counselor Voth refused to leave. He sat in his chair at the highest point of the chamber, watching the human fleet close in. He was very old now, ancient beyond belief, but his eyes still burned with stubborn pride. He had exiled humanity. He had called them barbarians. He would not run from them now. Counselor Myra found him there, alone in the darkness. "You should surrender," she said gently. "The war is lost. There is no shame in accepting reality." "Reality," Voth repeated, his voice bitter. The reality is that I was right. Humanity is aggressive. Humanity is violent. Look what they have done." Myra shook her head. "They have done exactly what we would have done in their place. We pushed them into a corner and expected them to accept it quietly. We were fools, Voth. We created this enemy ourselves." The station shuddered as Imperium breaching pods attached to the hull. Somewhere in the corridors, the fighting began. Human Marines, led by Colonel the Jun Han, pushed toward the council chamber. The resistance was weak. Most defenders had already surrendered. The Jun moved through the station with professional efficiency. This was the moment his father had dreamed of, the moment his grandmother had prayed for. The place where humanity had been humiliated would now witness humanity's triumph. But the Jun felt no joy, only the cold focus of a soldier completing his mission. His squad reached the great chamber doors. They were massive, ancient, decorated with symbols from dozens of civilizations. They had stood for 10,000 years. They would not stand much longer. "Open it," the Jun ordered. The doors exploded inward. The Yun and his Marines entered the chamber, weapons raised. They found only 2 aliens inside, an old Talveen female and an ancient Kelrith male. The Talveen raised her hands in surrender. The Kelrith did not move. "Elder Counselor Voth," Jun said, "you are under arrest. The war is over." Voth stared at him with hatred that had burned for a century. "You are barbarians. You will always be barbarians. This changes nothing." The Jun felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. His father had taught him that victory required grace. Cruelty in triumph was the mark of a weak spirit. "Take them both," he said to his soldiers. Gently, Supreme Commander Mi Yong received Voth on the bridge of Ascendant Earth. The old Kelrith stood before her, bound but unbowed, his eyes still full of contempt. Mi Yong studied him for a long moment. This was the being who had shaped humanity's destiny with a single speech. This was the reason the Imperium existed. "I offer you terms," Mi Yong said calmly. "The Council will formally recognize the Terran Imperium as a sovereign power. You will acknowledge our territorial claims. The exile is ended." "Never." Voth spat. Mi Yong nodded slowly. "Then the war continues. And you should know that our next targets are the Kelrith homeworlds. Your people will suffer because of your pride." She watched Voth's face change. The anger remained, but something else appeared beneath it. Fear, not for himself, but for his people. Even now, at the end of everything, he cared about the Kelrith. "The choice is yours," Mi Yong continued. "Pride or survival?" "I recommend survival." The silence lasted a long time. "I will sign your treaty," Voth finally said, his voice hollow. The Treaty of the Stars was signed in the very chamber where humanity had been rejected. Prime Executor Bo-Ra represented the Imperium, standing where Captain Deho had stood a century before. But this time, humanity was not asking for acceptance. This time, humanity was granting terms. The treaty established borders, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. The outer marker was dissolved. Humans could travel anywhere in the galaxy. Several council species actually requested to join the Imperium. Impressed by humanity's strength and efficiency. After the ceremony, Counselor Myra met privately with Biora. The 2 women sat in a quiet room overlooking the stars. Speaking honestly for the first time, "Our greatest mistake was underestimating your resolve," Myra admitted. "We thought isolation would break your spirit. We did not understand that adversity makes you stronger." Ba-O-Ra nodded slowly. "And our greatest strength has always been turning adversity into opportunity. You gave us a century to prepare. You gave us a cause to unite behind. In a way, we should thank you." Myra almost smiled. "I do not think Voth would appreciate such thanks." "No," Ba-O-Ra agreed. He would not. The celebration on Earth lasted for days. In the Great Assembly Hall, where President Min-Su had declared the Imperium initiative a century before. Veterans and heroes gathered to mark the end of the war. Admiral Dong Hyeon stood beside Commander Jae-hee, both wearing medals they had earned through blood and sacrifice. Colonel Jun shook hands with men and women who had served beside him in the assault on Concordia Prime. Even old Hyeon Woo, brought from his colony world for the occasion, watched with tears in his eyes. Prime Executor Bao-Ra addressed them all, and through them addressed every human in the galaxy. 100 years ago, we were told we were not worthy. We were told we were too aggressive, too violent, too primitive. We were locked behind a boundary and expected to accept our shame. She paused, looking out at the crowd. We did not accept it. We took our anger and turned it into strength. We took our isolation and turned it into opportunity. We built an empire that needs no one's approval. And when the galaxy tried to destroy us, we showed them what humanity truly is. The crowd cheered, a sound that echoed across the planet. The exile is over. The Terran Imperium stands. And the galaxy will never forget what we have accomplished. On distant worlds, human children looked up at night skies filled with ships bearing the Imperium's banner, a rising sun against the black of space. They would grow up knowing that humanity had earned its place among the stars. Not through begging, not through submission, through strength, determination, and an unbreakable will. In a quiet laboratory on Mars, old Taemin Park examined the ancient artifacts that Scout G1 had discovered decades before. The technology was incredible, far beyond anything the Council possessed. And the genetic evidence was clear. Humanity shared markers with this ancient civilization. Perhaps, long ago, humans had been scattered across the galaxy and forgotten. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not been rejected by their superiors. They had been feared by those who sensed, even without knowing why, that humans were something more than they appeared. Tae-Min smiled, placing the ancient crystal back in its container. The future held many mysteries. Many secrets still waited in the darkness between the stars. But whatever came next, humanity would face it together. The exile was over. The Imperium had risen. And the galaxy would never be the same. In the end, the species that had been pushed aside, laughed at, and imprisoned behind an invisible line had become the greatest power the stars had ever seen. Not because they were perfect, not because they were superior, but because they refused, absolutely refused, to accept that they could not succeed.